certainly the election has helped with that. But, you know, electoral reform is something that we're interested in at the provincial level also, and that's more action there happening not too distant future. So we really do hope that you can consider participating and helping us with the whole issue of electoral reform. So please avail yourself of the information. I hope you have some and take a look at that. That's got a lot of good info in there about electoral reform and why we'd want such a thing. The other thing I would mention is if, again, we do have some expenses in putting these things on, so if you could help us out at the donation box, that's back there too. Okay, so there is a deep crisis in Canadian democracy. Our parliament has become hyper-partisan, and the current government is rather uncompromising. A lot of budget bills go through with maybe no consideration, no amendments, little debate. So this is not, these problems are becoming endemic to the system. These kinds of problems, though, they didn't necessarily start with this government. Some of the problems have been forming up for quite a long time. And you know, we think that the electoral system has a role to play in some of this dysfunction that's been creeping up and happening. Not only dysfunction, but basically public apathy about, you know, elections and what kind of results we get, and what kind of control we have as citizens. I kind of grew up hearing the word citizen a lot more than I do now. I almost want to get a t-shirt that says consumer, and that's crossed out and says citizen. Because most of the time I don't really think of myself as a consumer, but I'm referred to as consumer a lot. I'm a citizen. And so that's part of the feeling that we all have in wanting to create a better democracy. So we think at Fairville, Manitoba, we think that electoral reform could take us a long way towards solving some of those kinds of problems. We know the current system that we use is in use in fewer and fewer countries. Now we're down to a handful of countries that use the system that we have. We use it because of history. And whenever most countries, other people in other places, have decided to choose a new system, they don't choose the one we've got. They typically have not for decades and decades. They choose other systems. So we think there's something to that. We hope tonight to hear some of these different visions for voting reform. And you know, there's quite a lot of choice in that. And so although many of us are at least bought into the idea of electoral reform, there's a lot of ways to skin that cat, a lot of different systems in use. So we should understand that, and we will get to over time. I mean, sort of step one, I think, is to get through the idea of changing the system, and maybe step two might be what system do we adopt. And there's a lot of available resources around the world for that. And tonight we're going to have we actually invited all four candidates for Winnipeg South Centre. And I'm very pleased to see that we have three that have been able to get here.
I'm Andrew Park, Winnipeg South Centre candidate for the Green Party, and I'm the Environment Critic for the Green Party of Canada. Before I start my opening statement, I have to acknowledge absent friends, because I have to deploy the Conservative rubber chicken of shame. Like Jim said, you know, Matt, Jim and myself have been up here many times now. It's practically a bromance.
Let's not get carried away.
Well, yes, a little too much. But, okay, I got into this election precisely because of the problems that we've got in our democracy. We face enormous challenges in democracy. The first past-the-post system originated back in the 19th century, when the challenges of nation building were relatively straightforward. The parties that were present, there were only two main parties, and so the first past-the-post system might have been the logical system for that time. But the challenges that we face today in the 21st century are unimaginably more complex, whether we're talking about climate change, or whether we're talking about the challenge of conflict and sectarianism in the Middle East, as we were last week. These challenges are enormously complex. And so for me, the subject of democratic reform isn't just about which voting system we're going to choose, but it's how we address the whole issue of how to conduct democracy in the 21st century Canada.
Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Matt Henderson, and I'm the NDP candidate for Winnipeg South Centre. And thank you to you for coming out. You're obviously politically engaged, and it's wonderful to share time and space with you on Treaty 1 land. I'm a teacher. I teach in Fort Garry at St. John's Ravenscourt, and I teach high school students about democracy. And over the last decade, it's becoming sort of a real challenge to talk about Canada's democracy and enter into discussion with students about Canada's democracy, because the curricula suggests that that Canada's democracy is strong, it's vibrant, and it's inclusive. And of course, we know that's not the case. And yes, I want to talk about electoral reform today, but I think we have to look more generally at our democracy and how it's been overridden in the last few decades by real forces that have wanted to marginalize certain pockets of the country. And so some of the things that my students have brought up in the past that we talk about is their disenfranchisement, right? Why is it that youth don't come out and vote in the numbers that we need them to come out? Why is it that there are omnibus bills being put through Parliament? Why is it that closure is being shut down in the House of Commons? Why is it that our civil liberties are being suspended in this country? And I think it's been really gratifying and exciting to talk about those challenges with them and proposing different solutions, not only in terms of electoral reform, but democratic reform. And I think the NDP is the party that's taken traditionally strong stances on how to create a better democracy, how to create a better electoral system. And I look forward to entering into a discussion with you about this as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, question number 1. Since World War I, Canada has had 16 majority governments, of which only 4 were true majorities, where most of the votes were cast for the government. In 2011, 39% of the vote elected 54% of the parliament and 100% of the power, and 7 million votes did not elect anyone. Do you agree that the proportion of votes cast for a party should result in the proportion of MPs the party has? Which electoral system do you think would best accomplish this? And we will start with Andrew Park.
Okay. So I see Jean's over there, and I'm waving around the copy of the Kotler report that she mentioned in the previous forum. Erwin Kotler, distinguished parliamentarian, produced a report with specific recommendations for a proportional voting system. The particular voting system recommended by the Law Commission was a mixed member proportional system. That's a system in which you vote on the one hand for a local candidate who would be selected under this system by first past the post, and on the other hand for candidates on a party list. And basically it's that party list that provides the big element of proportionality in the system, because any disproportions in the local first past the post vote are made up for by seats from the party list. Okay, that's the very broad strokes of that particular system. But there's another system in there called a single transferable vote that I find rather appealing. And the single transferable vote would apply to districts with multiple candidates, in which you actually elected multiple candidates, which means that, for example, in Winnipeg, instead of 9 different ridings, you might have, say, 3 super ridings, each of which would elect 5 MPs, say, something like that, 4 or 5 MPs. And I believe that single transferable vote has certain advantages. First of all, it allows you to potentially transfer your first and second choice between both candidates and party allegiances. Okay? Second of all, single transferable vote avoids one particular problem with mixed member proportional, and that is the party list. Who gets to be on the party list? Who selects the party list? Right? Are the party lists going to be some sort of mini Senate with the party leaders you know, skewing the selection to their friends, or are they going to be selected in some other fashion that is more amenable to democracy? Okay, thank you.
The NDP has come out and said that this will be the last unfair election that we have in Canadian history. We have, from the get-go, advocated for a mixed-member proportional system. We even tried to get it through Parliament, where it was shot down. But that's where we see electoral reform in the future, in the near future, and we've pledged to do this within the first mandate when we form government. What it does, as Andrew has said, is that it provides us still with that local connection with the candidate, right? Which I think is really, really valuable. We all go door to door and we make connections with you, and I think that's important that we're able to sort of physically touch and access our candidate. Maybe not in this riding right now, but historically. But also that those parties who are not represented and those voices that are not necessarily represented under a first past the post system get that representation in the House of Commons. And I think we can, you know, in terms of the issue with the slate, I mean, we were all nominated by our constituency associations in very democratic ways by the membership within this riding, the different memberships in this riding. And I think there are ways to nominate slates which are democratic, not necessarily just appointments, but there are ways that we can have a discussion about this, whether it's at the local constituency level or at convention level. And so that's our stance, and we look forward to your support if you're on board with mixed member proportional representation.
In our democratic reform package, our leader Justin Trudeau announced that if elected to govern Canada, this would be the last first past the post election in Canada. We have said that we will ask an all-party committee to spend 18 months traveling across the country, consulting you in forums just like this from coast to coast about the system that works best for Canada. And after we have come to a consensus, an all-party consensus, we would then debate it in Parliament, vote, and that would become the next electoral system for us. There are best practices from around the world that are available for us to study. I think that Canadians have creative ideas about how this will work. One thing we know for sure is that people have to feel as if their vote counted. So, we're on record with a very firm position on the next step. We will consult Canadians about the step after that.
As my Irish great-grandmother used to say, you've earned your cough drop tonight. I never understood what that meant, but she had a lot of peculiar things to say. But it's been wonderful to share space here on Treaty 1 land and to engage into a critical discussion about how we make democracy better in this country. You are fabulously engaged, and I really commend you on that and coming out. This, like we said and we talked about, and someone reiterated that the stakes are incredibly high in this particular election. I implore you to, and you've already done your research, I'm sure, but to engage in a conversation with us, engage in a conversation with your neighbors, to see where your values line up. Where do your values line up with the parties? I implore you to vote with conviction. I implore you to vote with your heart and to get on board, to get involved. Get involved in the political process so that at the end of the day, you know that you've been on the right side of history.
But, I mean, we've talked about a lot of things to do with democracy tonight, and to a very real degree, I think we would all agree that this election is about citizenship versus self-interested consumerism. On the one hand, you've got three candidates here who I believe are all asking you to vote as citizens, to be engaged with the issues, right, and actually to vote on the issues. On the other hand, on the chicken side of the spectrum, we have a party that has spent the last 10 years telling Canadians that they were just self-interested taxpayers and that was all they were interested in. Okay? That has been the rhetoric, and I think part of our jobs as candidates is to take back the language of citizenship and to appeal to Canadians as the intelligent, engaged people that we know them to be, right? So
I want to thank Fairvote Manitoba for bringing us together as a community to talk seriously and with civility about the important issues that face Canada. I was born on Niagara Street. I was raised on Elm. I spent much of my adult life on Ash. I now live on Yale. Played very bad hockey at the River Heights Community Club. A little bit better with baseball and football, but this is my home. My children were raised here. This is where I learned my values. This is where I learned my citizenship. And it is my ambition to be a strong voice for us in the Parliament of Canada. And I ask you, when you cast the ballot, to think about that. What candidate will be that strong voice, and what party is most aligned with your own thinking about where we want to take this country? I'm enriched by every conversation I've had since this began for me almost a year and a half ago. I've been enriched by tonight, and thank you very much for your engagement.